Sometimes you see a headline that's so bizarre, you have to read it twice. US president wants to buy Greenland. It sounds like a joke, right? But this was no joke. It was a real estate pitch that quickly spiraled into a full-blown crisis, one that threatened to fracture the entire Western alliance. So let's dive into the anatomy of the Greenland standoff.
And this quote, this is what set the whole thing on fire. You see, former President Trump wasn't just floating an idea. He was explicitly tying the purchase of Greenland to economic punishment for America's closest allies. This was not a negotiation. It was an ultimatum, plain and simple.
So a tariff for Greenland? How exactly does a real estate pitch turn into a global threat? Let's break down the specific plan that put the United States on a direct collision course with some of its oldest friends.
And just look who is in the crosshairs. We're not talking about geopolitical rivals here. The targets were the very heart of the transatlantic alliance. Denmark, of course, but also Germany, France, the UK, and a handful of other key European allies.
And the plan itself was designed to methodically turn up the heat. It was all about tariffs, a tax on goods they sell to the US. It was set to start with a 10% hit, and then, just a few months later, it would escalate to a really punishing 25%. This was a clear strategy of using economic pain to force a political outcome.
So what was the official reason for such a drastic move? Well, it all boiled down to two words: national security. And to be fair, Greenland's location is a huge strategic asset. It's this perfect perch for defense and surveillance, right in the middle of the Arctic, a region where powers like Russia and China are getting more and more active.
So, how did Europe respond to all this pressure? Did they cave? Not a chance. Instead, they formed a completely united front. A wave of defiance just swept across the continent as leaders began to push back, and they pushed back hard.
Right at the center of the storm was Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, and she did not mince words. Europe will not be blackmailed. Wow. That single line really set the tone for the entire continent. For them, this wasn't a business deal. It was coercion, and they were having none of it.
And you heard that exact sentiment from the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who essentially said, hold on a minute, you just don't do this. He argued that using economic threats against your own NATO allies over security matters is just fundamentally wrong. It violates the basic principles of an alliance.
Then you had French President Emmanuel Macron, who zoomed out to the bigger picture. He framed this as an issue of core European sovereignty. For him, this wasn't just about one island. It was about who gets to make decisions about European security, especially in a critical region like the Arctic.
And let's not forget, this wasn't just a squabble among politicians. In Greenland itself, the people made their voices heard